kind of like their system. I feel
really?
The U.S. system used to work okay, but the thing is, it's risky, right? So what if...
I've never heard a good argument against the two-party system until what you just said. Pretty stuck on Democrat and Republican. I think most of if I say anything wrong or stupid, correct me, okay? You're the guy, you're the expert, okay? Seriously, yeah.
It will be crazy for China to want another great recession in the U.S. because the last great recession almost, killed the Chinese economy. China may have an incentive to prove that democracy is bad. Imagine if you're a dictator, what's the number one thing you're worried about?
There are countries that are like black holes. If you ask an average Chinese citizen, like, what does socialism mean to you? The problem is people think that America can just withdraw from some stage. It'll be neutral, but it won't be neutral. China's going to be there. Russia's going to be there. Don't compare America to no America. You have to compare America to China influence.
He was actually executed.
What do you think is like the best change right now that America could make to its system of governance?
That's Andrew Tate's red pill version of masculinity, or what? Because that's not masculinity at all.
Hey guys, welcome to Bridges episode 14. Today we are joined by Huey Li, who is a PhD studying political science with a specialty in electoral systems. And we have Chuck Holton, who was a military writer, stock trader, war correspondent, journalist, all-around interesting guy. And we are having our first roundtable discussion with two different guests. So yeah, it should be fun. Okay, I have an important question for you. I was a music school dropout. So I went to school for 3 years. I had to quit. I was working too much. So every time I find a college grad, I like to ask them about their major. I get a lot of people, because I do politics online, they come through my Discord that major in political science. And I always ask them, wow, what do you guys study? What do you remember? What did you learn? And I've never heard an undergrad give me an answer for what they learned in their poli-sci class. They're like, oh, well, we read a little bit of two philosophers and that was it. You specialize in electoral systems. Yeah, what was your thesis on?
It's on sort of what kind of system that can ensure winners are divided so the losers don't lose everything, right? That's sort of, how to design a system in a way that, because when you have a majority rule, it's possible that the majority will get everything. That's not what we want, right? So we want to make sure the minority also gets something, right? So not the minority, but not the minority in a racial sense, but the minority in an electoral sense. Like the loser of an election, at least they can get something, right? So that's, that's kind of, how to design a system in that way. Yeah. So but the key way to the ultimate way to do that is to make sure the majority is not stable. So the majority have to seek help from the minority to pass stuff, right? So that how to make sure the majority is divided. That's sort of esoteric things. I don't think the audience will be too interested in this, but yeah.
I'm super interested in it.
I'm also so interested in this. I love electoral stuff.
The only reason I bring this up is because there's a ton of reasons why I bring it up. In the United States, we're very sharply divided over things like the Senate and the Electoral College, because in the US, especially people on the left, people get very mad at the idea that land has representation essentially in our parliament, right? People don't like the fact that Montana gets 2 electoral votes, even though, they're not electoral votes, I'm sorry, 2 senators. Even though they're such a small state, it's so insane. And I just came from Israel, and when I was over there, I've studied Israel a lot internationally in terms of history, but I didn't know much about their domestic politics. But now that I understand more about their domestic politics, are you familiar with how their parliamentary system is arranged? Yeah. Looking at a system where they have no district representation and it's just straight from the entire country, I was like, this is a fucking disaster. Oh my God. So when you're talking about, go.
Yeah, despite what's going on in Israeli politics, I kind of like their system. I feel
really?
Because what they did is they ensure every party, no matter how small, can get into the parliament, right? So
because the threshold is 3% or something to
of course the downside is that you have to keep having elections because because it's a parliamentary system. You have to maintain 50% of the support in the parliament in order to stay in government, right? So that means
the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, that means as long as you lose that 50%, you have to have a new election, right? Or maybe you have an alternative coalition. You have to negotiate with the opposition and find an alternative coalition. Or normally it's hard, so you just have a new election. That's the downside, of course.
Does Israel have a? I'm so sorry. Is it a Westminster system like Canada? Or is it based off of it? Because it sounds so
exactly.
similar.
I mean, they're both parliamentary systems in a way that the government has to constantly maintain 50% of support from the parliament, right? That's the same. But Canada has a electoral system that's less proportional. They also have districts, like in the U.S., right? So they don't have as many parties, because when you have districts, you have to make sure you not only have certain amount of votes, but also your votes have to be concentrated geographically. You can't just have a few votes here, a few votes there. That won't get you any seat, right? So you have to have certain size and certain regional concentration. So that's why Canada doesn't have as many parties. They still have more parties than the U.S. The U.S. is really special in that case. Only 2 parties. That doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So the Canada has more parties than the U.S., but way fewer parties than Israel. Yeah.
Okay. And you think that it's good that when I look at when I look at the coalition government in Israel, I would assume that the Likud, I think it's 135 seats in their Knesset or something. Likud probably has 50 seats, and then there's a couple smaller parties that make up the government. But it's not like that at all. I think the Likud have 20 some seats, and there's so many of these smaller parties. You think that's a better system, or? The main complaint now in Israel is you get these small extremist parties that seem to be dictating the agenda for the whole government.
Yeah, but right now I think it's a very special period in Israel where Netanyahu basically served for more than 10 years, 12 years or something.
20 maybe, because he was from 96 to 99 as well.
Yeah, but that's very unusual in Israel. Normally their prime minister has very short tenure, like 3 years, 4 years, something like that. So I don't know what's going on right now. I don't know. I actually had a TikTok episode with my former professor, Matthew Sugard. We talked about why Netanyahu can stay this long compared to all other prime ministers. But, he had some explanation in terms of, how his position relative to other parties. But this is not the norm in Israel. I don't like the current norm, honestly. I definitely think he served too long. In fact, I think no national leader should serve that long, no matter which country it is. So, I think maybe 10 years, 12 years should be the maximum. When you serve too long, it's just all sorts of trouble. You have an echo chamber, and you appoint too many of your loyalists in the government, and all sorts of things will come out. But
I think the problem with governments is they're made up of people. It wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for the people, which are the people bring the imperfection to the government system, no matter what system you have, because people are imperfect.
But I think that's the goal then. When you design a system, the system is designed in mind with tyranny of the majority and stuff. It's okay, well, we know that people were going to do this, so we have to be able to represent these other opinions.
Set up a system that counters the flaw of the rule.
But I definitely don't like Israeli politics right now, but I think this is not their norm, at least not their norm compared to most part of their history. I can't explain why Netanyahu.
I mean, to be fair, it's a young history, right? We're talking about a country that's 78 years old or something. So this is like a quarter of their history now with Netanyahu, right?
Well, most of democracies are that young. I mean, that's most of the.
We're in America right now.
America is
I was in Israel the other day, and there was a guy I was with who had a book on his shelf that was older than our country.
Well, when you're in Europe, everything you look at can be older than our country, unfortunately.
It makes you feel like, oh man.
So they're physically older,
this is a 300-year-old book. He just had sitting on the shelf.
Wow.
Sorry, I'm focusing on you a lot, and then we'll make this more inclusive. Do you think for Israel, do you think the fact that there's no land, no district representation, you think that's a good way for a government to be structured?
I mean, of course, that's only doable in a small country, right? If you're the size of Canada, you have to have some sort of districts. But some countries, they do it in fact, most European countries, they do it in between the two extremes. They have districts, but each district has multiple seats, right? Each district is larger than the U.S. districts. Maybe they have, let's say if they have 20 legislators, but they have maybe if they have 200 legislators, but they have, say, 50 districts, right? Each district has 5 or 6 or 7 seats. And within that district, they do it proportionally, right? So it's sort of like Israel, but not like the whole country. They don't do it in the whole country. They only do the proportionality within each district.
Okay.
Right, but the U.S. doesn't have this. each district only has one person, right? So you have to be the number one in that district, right? So So there are a lot of ways to sort of combine the best of both worlds, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, but of course the Israeli system, like itself, it's not very applicable to larger countries. You know,
Gotcha.
it's just
Makes sense.
you will have hundreds of parties. That'll be
And then I guess the final like democracy related question or political system related question: do you have do you think that America's two-party system, do you think that's superior to a coalition government? Do you think coalition-style governments are better? Or do you think there's pros and cons to both?
Personally, I definitely think coalition governments are better. Yeah, so the U.S. system used to work okay, but the thing is, it's risky, right? So what if one of the parties suddenly turns bad? I mean, that's I didn't think it was a big possibility until 2016, you know, because what if, you know, when you have only two parties, I mean, it's just, you know, it's less likely to have a bad party. Like in some European countries, there's always a far right party and a far left party. They always have like really extreme, you know, agenda. So they have been there for decades. But the good thing is that they were never able to form the government. They were never able to almost never able to enter the cabinet, right? They're always like fringe parties. They always exist, but they don't really have actual power. But in the US, it's like, you know, both parties used to be super moderate, but the problem is if one party suddenly turns bad, it can be, you know, pretty damaging.
Okay,
Yeah.
I've never heard that argument before. That's pretty convincing.
It kind of seems to me like we have a little different hybrid where our coalition comes in the initial stages of the presidential election when you have the primaries, because you have maybe 15 candidates for each party, and they represent different kinds of things. So one might be a little more socialistic, one might be a little more focused on green things, one more, you know, whatever. And the country, the people as a whole, have to hash out what they think is most important, which one of those people best represents the things that they think are most important at the beginning, and then the two survivors of those go up against each other in the general election. The problem we have is that, well, like in 2016, Donald Trump was able to purchase his way past the primaries because the people in the primaries are competing for the donor dollars that are out there for the Republicans or for the Democrats. And so they've got to get out there and shake what mama gave them, so to speak, to get people's attention and get the donor dollars that they need to win the primaries. And then they're going to get everything that comes in the general election. Anybody that's going to support Republicans is going to support that candidate in the general. But if you're able to self-fund in the primaries and jump yourself ahead by spending way more money of your own, then you can short circuit that process.
I think donor dollars help, but I think Trump tapped into something that was pretty unique, absent just the donor dollar things. One thing, I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about this. I hate that I've never heard a good argument against the two-party system until what you just said. One thing that having a coalition-style government probably helps moderate, though, is right now in the United States, you're pretty stuck on Democrat and Republican. I think most of if I say anything wrong or stupid, correct me, okay? You're the guy, you're the expert, okay? Seriously, yeah. So my understanding is that there's a lot of like conflicting research about like how to turn out voters and what helps, what doesn't help or whatever. But one of the things that people seem to coalesce around is that the public has this idea that when people are campaigning, you're trying to win voters over. You're trying to get them. I'm trying to get independents, trying to get people from the blah, blah, blah. And then I've heard there's a larger group that I think has a little bit more data backing that what you're really trying to do is you're just trying to turn out your base. You want your people to come out and vote. That's what you're really trying to do. You're not trying to bring a Republican to a Democrat side.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, but I bet that in a coalition-style government, right now in our system, you don't really have to worry once you've made it past the primaries about what you say. You just have to turn out your base because nobody's really jumping ship from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party or the Democrat Party to the Republican Party. But if there were other comparable parties, that might be a risk that maybe it doesn't happen in actuality, but it forces a little bit of moderation on the side of the candidates.
Can pull people one way or the
yeah,
other.
because now you're like, okay, well, I want to be super unhinged because I'm the fucking nominee, so who cares? But if I'm too unhinged, we're going to lose a lot of people to the Tea Party or the Libertarian Party or the neo-right or whatever, right? But because there's only two and you're so bisected, now that you got them, you can go off like probably farther than what a coalition style system would tolerate.
Makes sense.
Do you think that's a fair summary, or do you think that's...
Yeah, I think it. Yeah.
Okay.
I have another question for you. I'm sorry. I'm just obsessed with systems that have to
Don't
accommodate
apologize.
for
We brought him
people.
here to ask questions.
I know, but I feel bad because we're like,
There are
okay, I'm going
puppets
to grill you about
yeah,
electoral
grill 'em.
systems right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've also been decently, obviously I'm Canadian, so I grew up with a multi-party system. And one thing that I've been really interested in studying in the last 3 months is like division of power within the American system, because a two-party system is just like so odd to me. It's just fascinating. And one thing that sold me more toward the two-party system, and maybe you'll sell me away from it, is the argument of primaries giving the nuance. But if we think about people, if we have bad voter turnout with just the GE, just the general election, are primaries a bad way to get nuance? Because essentially you're putting the burden of nuance on just like citizens participating, which seems to be already a massive like natural struggle. Like, are primaries basically actually a bad system for nuance because only the most like kind of rabid political actors anyways are even going to turn up at primaries to vote? I'm super curious. Do you think that they're good at bringing the nuance that an otherwise multi-party system can give?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by nuance. Like,
do primaries give us the best candidates, and do they make people vote for the best candidates for the country?
Yeah, it also sort of depends on what you mean by best. But I think primaries sort of compensate the two-party system by bringing in new dimensions, right? Not just the main cleavage, right? You're able to express your cross-cutting cleavages, right? It's a term in because not just left and right, but also up and down and front and back and things like that. So yeah, it helps in a way, sort of, because if you only have two parties and also the party elites decide nomination, that's kind of I would say that maybe even worse. Because the participation would be disastrous. Because should I pause or
no,
okay.
You're good. Keep going.
Yeah. So yeah, because if you only have two parties and you only have a handful of people in each party to determine the nomination, it will be kind of crazy, right? In Israel, like a country like Israel, their nomination is mostly determined sort of behind closed doors, but it's okay because they have so many parties, right? If you don't like your party's nomination, you just form a new party, right? So that's no big deal, right? But in the US, forming a new party is basically political suicide. So primaries are kind of, it's sort of a necessary compromise. It's not good, but you can't imagine not having it.
It's better than not.
Yeah. It's just, but exactly how much they can help, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm really not sure. Yeah.
Do you like the American system as well, where voters kind of have this direct impact on specifically voting for the president? Because my understanding, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert on this, is that before 1968, it wasn't the case in the States that citizens got like such a direct say on presidents and who was running and who won. It was more what was it called? Like do you know the presidential caucus? You maybe don't know what I'm talking about.
Depends on how you're implying it. Technically, right now, citizens don't have a direct say. It's technically states.
It's states.
But state legislatures usually apportion their electorates based on citizens voting. I don't know what happened before 1968.
I don't think the electoral college have any independent say even before 1968. If the voters want this person, it's really hard for them to do anything to not vote for them. Do you think it's good? I think, for getting to your question, do you think it's good that for a system where the citizens vote for their prime minister, for their president, or do you think it's better to have a prime minister that comes through like a party system instead? I can't say for sure, but I think the dominant idea in the political science community is that parliamentary systems are slightly better. So even though citizens don't have a direct say on who is the prime minister, but the thing is, the prime minister, it doesn't matter because the prime minister can be fired anytime, right? So let's say in Britain, like their past few prime ministers weren't that ideal, of course, but at least they could change them like relatively fast, right? Like because they don't have a fixed term, right? If they lost popularity, the parliament can collectively decide, we don't want this guy anymore. So even though their party won the election, but their party as a collective body, they can still remove that person. It's more flexible, right? Even though, the downside is that citizens don't directly have a say of they only have a say of which party. Mm-hmm. But when they vote for that party, they sort of anticipate who will be the prime ministers, right? Because they know who the leader of that party is. Yeah, but the good thing is that, once that person lost popularity, you can quickly remove them, right? Even someone like Margaret Thatcher, she used to be super popular, but when she lost popularity, the Conservative Party basically says, sorry, we can't have you anymore. And she didn't finish her third term and just had to leave. Yeah.
So can I ask a question about that? The prime minister with that system, does it lead to more sort of continuity of government? Does it smooth out the excesses of, like in our system, we get a Democratic president and he goes 100% this direction, and then the day we get a Republican president, he cancels all of that and goes 100% in this direction, and it makes our allies like have no idea how to deal with us because they have to look at the next who might win the next election. Like Israel might completely lose support if somebody gets in, and might get more support if the other one gets in. Ukraine, same thing. If there was a parliamentary system, would that lead to more consistency in like foreign policy and things like that?
Well, I feel like what you said is a pretty new phenomenon, right? Because the U.S. foreign policy used to be relatively consistent.
Stable.
I think. Like Trump brought in a lot of new variables. I mean, before Trump, I don't think anyone would even think about quitting NATO or even think about, not supporting Ukraine or something like that. Like, I mean, even if it's another similar populist president, like, I don't know, let's say if it's Ted Cruz or
Bernie Sanders would be a populist.
Yeah. But I mean, even Sanders, I don't think he will just outright saying, let Russia have those territories.
No, absolutely.
I don't think so.
Not.
Yeah. I think it's a more specific like phenomenon that's
just sort of a symptom of the great divorce that we're seeing in our country, right? But in terms continuity, I'm not sure U.S. is less continuous. I mean, at least in the past, I'm not sure the U.S. was less continuous than other countries.
I was going to say, because Great Britain, through their parliamentary system, Brexited, which was pretty abrupt.
That was even within the same party. They didn't even change the party, but the direction just.
Do you think there's any truth on a macro sense? You hear a lot of people talk about the strengths and weaknesses for foreign policy between democracies and dictatorships, that a dictatorship can weather some kind of like unpopularity in their population when it comes to waging particular foreign conflicts, whereas democracies are more susceptible to a changing of the minds. Do you think there's any truth to that, or do you think that's largely fictitious? Or
well, I mean, empirically, like dictatorships are just as likely to fight wars even more likely to fight wars than democracies. But the United States is special. A lot of people use the United States as an example that democracies are even more belligerent than dictatorship, but that's not very. I don't think that's true, because the United States is too strong. It's like when you put some kids in the same class and one kid is so much taller and stronger than the other kid, he's more likely to get involved in conflict, right? So the United States is a special case. But if you remove the United States from the sample, dictatorships are way more likely to get into conflict than any other countries, right? So,
do you think that this is getting into the weeds a bit? Do you think this is more symptomatic of dictatorships being more likely to exist in non-aligned states Because so, for instance, like you might say like, oh, well, look, in Europe, none of these countries get into much conflict. But somebody could say, well, even if every European country was a dictatorship, they're all part of NATO. And if they're part of NATO, they can't get into conflicts because it would fuck everything up and the US wouldn't let them. So the dictatorship or the democracy engaging in conflict is actually more a result of them being, not part of the first or second world, but the third world, non-aligned states. Do you think there's any truth to that? Or do you think that the democratic or dictatorial aspects are actually important for determining if a country engages in conflict more?
But if every European country has a dictator, do you think NATO would even be possible? I mean, in the past, there were some alliances between dictatorships, but those alliances I don't think they would be as stable as NATO.
Isn't there kind of an alliance between dictators right now, though, between like kind of like Putin and China and Iran? I think you did a video on this today or yesterday.
But I don't think it's as stable as NATO. I mean,
it's an alliance of convenience, I would say, especially between like Russia and Iran. They're actually adversaries, but they're being brought together to try to
common enemy.
And go around the sanctions that are being placed on both of them, try to help each other out.
Yeah, and China and Russia did fight before, like over an island, like in the 60s, and also, they supported different sides in Vietnam when China was fighting Vietnam. And
there's a piece of land in eastern Russia, southeastern Russia, that is larger than Ukraine that used to belong to China until like the 1930s, right? I've heard some talk about China wanting that back.
Well, some people in China want it back, but I don't think the CCP is really serious about ever getting them back. That'll be too much work, I think. But
maybe to branch to like tie the two things. Do you have any more questions on electoral?
Sorry,
systems?
I just have one thing to add, because empirically, we almost never see democracies fighting each other. I mean, they fight non-democracies all the time, but empirically, like we almost never see two electoral democracies like invading each other.
And you think that's a virtue of the political systems, not just the Cold War alignments?
Yeah, there's controversy within like international relations scholars on why that's the case. Honestly, I don't really know why, but it's just, at least empirically, we know it's mostly true. But theoretically, we're still not so sure. It may have something to do with trade or transparency, because their intentions are more clear, right? Because if you want to have a war, you need to have the debate before the war, like months or even years of debate. So your intentions are more visible. So it's less likely for two visible people to really get to the fight, because they
can see each other talking.
Yeah, they will think of a way to avoid it.
Does this include, or does this extend to more kind of like covert operations? In the United States, we don't learn much historically, but for South America, like a lot of countries, like defining historical moments have to do with U.S. intervention there. I don't have the history to know if most of these were democracies or not beforehand, but I know that some people would argue that the people had a preference for a certain type of leader. That conversation isn't as public because it's like the CIA.
That certainly, there was a time where the United States may work against, like even in the Arab Spring, when Egypt was having this popular leader, and obviously the United States didn't really like that leader. I don't know too much about that person, but
Muslim Brotherhood.
But I don't know which side I was on, but factually, yes, the United States sometimes worked against popular will in another country. That's possible. Yeah, but
we've meddled in all sorts of it. I mean, even now with a lot of Latin American governments, the United States certainly makes its presence known before the election. We would be very upset if Venezuela was doing that to us, which they would if they could.
I think people already are, yeah. But I know there was the time that I think Donald Trump recognized Guaido in
Juan Guaido, in
Venezuela, over the sitting president,
right?
Which was a little bit kind of
sort
undermining.
Declared him to be the new president.
Yeah,
we're like,
as he was challenging, and then there was the stuff in Bolivia, obviously, where there was a lot of questions about the election, and I think OAN was going over a lot of the electoral outcomes and saying that they didn't trust the servers. I don't know how directly involved the U.S. is in that. A lot of people claim the U.S. is involved in trying to overthrow every single regime on the planet at all points in time. So,
But there have even been times when, like Barack Obama we were right in the middle of a news cycle where we were all upset because I want to say it was some European country that was commenting on the ongoing election and saying, some European leader saying, well, people in America should definitely vote for this guy. And we're like, how dare you? You're not part of our country. And Barack Obama was literally saying the exact same thing about who the French should vote for in their elections, because Marine Le Pen was first coming to prominence then.
After 2013, the Syrian refugee crisis, the AfD in Germany, Marine Le Pen in France, a lot of right-wing parties were starting to pick up steam.
I just want to say these covert operations are probably unavoidable. I mean, given countries have different interests, but they are still not the same thing as outright wars, outright invasions. I mean, it will be very hard politically for the U.S. government to invade an established democracy. That voters won't be very happy, right? So even you invade like Afghanistan, there will be a lot of domestic oppositions. But if you invade an actual democracy, I think it's basically unimaginable. Yeah.
I think I've made that argument to Israelis and Americans, and people usually want to fight, where I'll say, like, technically, I mean, proxy wars are kind of a good thing, because if proxy wars are happening, it means that the two countries have the wherewithal to know that fighting directly against each other is not in either side's interest. So there's like other channels that are being explored to try to get their interests without engaging in like overt warfare. So in a way, it's kind of like an upgrade, but obviously it has its own challenges and everything involved with it as well. Do you think that do you study a lot of like international law, like ICJ, ICC, treaty convention? I'll ask the question.
I don't know too much about them. Yeah.
Do you have any opinion on the kind of like growing prevalence since 9/11 of non-state actors and their involvement on the world stage? Obviously, now we're talking about Hamas. Before it was ISIS, Al-Qaeda. Do you think that the world is going to have to find a different way to incorporate these non-state actors into the way that they see political systems or the way that they engage with each other? Or are we just going to keep kicking the can down the road, or will they go away?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we should probably find a way. But what is that way? I have no idea. It's like, especially like Hamas is definitely getting funding from state actors like Iran and Syria. So how do you prevent that? I really have no idea. I mean, you can't just you go into their head and figure out where the money, how the money travels. It's yeah.
I think I just read something either this morning or last night. I only read the headline, but it was something like the Arab League just recognized, I think, Hezbollah. Am I making this up? Did you read it? Anybody?
Wait, what does it mean by recognize?
I don't remember, either as like either the government of Lebanon or as like a member
shot,
of,
really?
I don't know. There was something weird.
I know that Lebanon and the Hezbollah, like just the last 2 days, have been like really tense with one another.
Never mind. Don't ignore me. Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe to tie you two guys in together, I'm super curious about China's impact on proxy war specifically. So I was talking the other day with somebody, I can't remember who, and they're like, you know what nobody ever talks about is like the growing influence that China has on like Africa with like American, like in like Chinese bases and stuff like that, and how that's like probably like a potential new front of proxy war. Is that correct? Like, what are people not aware of right now? Like, what have you seen? Are you seeing like war, like more influenced by Chinese kind of influence versus probably in the past it was all like Russia, America?
China is engaging in they are at war. If you look at what's happening between the U.S. and China from a U.S. standpoint, you say, oh, well, they're an adversary, but we're not actually at war with them. But if you look at Chinese understanding of the relationship between the United States and China, we are an enemy. We have been an enemy. I was watching them. They made a blockbuster movie in 2021. I was watching it last night, actually. That China did, and it only aired in China, and it was where China was victimized by America, and they fought back and they won a war against America. It's this big information campaign.
The Korean War, or what?
I'll show it to you. I've got it on my phone here, but so I was just reading about this, and in China, if you go to a museum, they're building lots of museums, and they're rewriting Chinese history, There have been, for example, several times when the United States has assisted China, like World War II against the Japanese and that sort of thing. And they're rewriting that history to be like America was the aggressor and was the bad guy in that situation. And of course, in a system like that, the people only have access to what the Chinese government shows them. So students are being taught that Americans are, they want to take over China. They want to destroy China. That I think I've talked to a lot of Chinese migrants who are coming through the Darien Gap. I'd like to ask you about that. Coming through the Darien Gap in Panama on their way to the United States now. There's 40,000 last year, which is massive. I mean, it's never happened before. And first of all, you kind of ask the question, like, how are you getting out of China? Like, you have to be allowed to leave. The government's, like, they have that jet ski guy that just drove out on a jet ski, but that's rare. So the government's got to know these people are going, and they get to the United States and they're so excited and surprised by what they see in the United States, because it's nothing like what they've been told by their government. So as we were talking about information war, that China is engaged in full court press, industrial espionage, cultural espionage, all forms of military espionage, corporate espionage around the world, even to the extent of, I mean, they're trying very hard to get primacy in AI. And one of the things you need to get a really good AI is a lot of data. And so they're gathering data from all over the planet, just mountains of it, with the expectation that they're going to be able to use that for something positive, to help them gain supremacy in some way at some point in the future using AI to go through those reams of data. So for example, when I was in Armenia last week, China gave a bunch of buses to this tiny country of Armenia, 2.5 million people in Asia. It was very nice of them to do, brand new buses, and they all have USB ports where you can charge your phone when you get on the bus. But when you do that, it downloads all your information to the bus and then uploads it to China. They found teapots, a lot of places around the world that were made in China, and somebody dropped one and the handle broke, the plastic handle, and it had a computer chip in the handle that had a Wi-Fi sniffer on it that would pick up your Wi-Fi, take all the traffic going through your Wi-Fi and send it to China. One of the reasons they won't let Huawei sell phones in the United States for that very reason, because everything that's done on that phone gets sent to a server in China. So yes, what I've seen in Panama, the Chinese came in and bought up all of the housing around the U.S. Embassy, knowing that the embassy employees would need some place to live. And so they rent them out to the people. And a friend of mine was head of the DEA down there, and he said, like, once a quarter, my landlord wants to replace the router in my house, and I have to tell him no. And they want very badly. He has to have them come in and sweep his house for bugs, like every month, and they find them. They find bugs in there, not cockroaches, but listening devices. They found light bulbs that have listening devices in the light bulb and a Wi-Fi chip that will then send all the audio that it picks up to a server in China someplace. So they see that as war by other means. And, I've been reading a book about this. If you go back to Sun Tzu, that if you can defeat your enemy without actually fighting him, that's much better, right? And so the book's called The 100-Year Marathon. Have you seen that book? Anyway, what he's talking about in there is that they're taking a very long-term approach to this, and they're doing it by expanding lots of different places, which it kind of raises the question of why they're allowing 40,000 people to come as migrants to the United States now. We have more than that coming. We have 290,000 Chinese students in the United States. They have these programs like the 1,000 Talents program and the Belt and Road Initiative and stuff.
Well, I just want to interrupt a little bit. So I don't think there's any means for the Chinese government to prevent people to come out, because it's not like North Korea, they can just shoot people who try to go out. But
Don't
in
they have to
China,
get
most
permission
people,
to go?
yeah, they have. Most people, I think, if they want to apply for passports, unless they are on a list, unless they sort of pissed off some officials. I mean, normally applying for passport shouldn't be that hard. The hard part is getting the visa, getting the permission from the other
To
country
get into the
to
United
accept
States,
them. Yeah, but I'm not sure getting a passport is that hard. I mean,
So they could leave.
Yeah.
But would it make a difference if the government knew they were not planning to come back? Or
but how would
I mean,
they
like
know?
say I'm
Yeah.
going on vacation to Ecuador.
Yeah, but
Well, that's fine.
How
then-
how would they know? How
Exactly.
yeah, so it's I don't think they have the capacity to really monitor people going out. Yeah,
So
it's-
that from the immigration standpoint, a lot of the immigration people that I, run with, we don't. There's no empirical evidence for this, but they're saying these are mostly Chinese military age males, and they're all coming in illegally across the U.S. border. They're going to rise up and try, and the Chinese are buying land next to U.S. military bases, which is true.
Yeah,
Right.
That's certainly possible. But most immigrants, like, what would be their motivations, right?
Right.
So,
and I've
I
talked
mean-
to a lot of them. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like I go talk to them, and they say, "No, it sucks in China right now. I'm leaving because the economy's terrible. The housing bubble. Have you heard about that housing bubble in China? It's like 3 billion, enough housing for 3 billion people.
Yeah.
That's empty in China because that's the only thing people were allowed to invest in.
That's probably one of the weaknesses of central planning versus like a capitalistic system.
Right.
I would also say that probably it's difficult if you think about the concept of like military aged males. My guess is going to be almost all forms of like illegal immigration or border crossing is probably done by military aged males.
Because it's a hard trail.
Children are never doing it. Women that have children aren't probably doing it on
I've
their
seen
own.
some.
They might, but they're probably
seen some,
paying
but not
people.
many.
But probably the risks
Less
are also
likely,
way higher
risks
as
are
well.
higher.
Very
right?
much so.
Yeah.
Harder to do.
Yes, very much so.
Would you then like agree with this like espionage, or I just wanted to kind of see what your thoughts were on this? Like, would you agree? Like, what do you think about kind of the proxy war that we might be in with China?
I think I'm largely agree, but I mean this is not surprising in any way. It's a huge country with a huge economy and with 1 billion people. Of course, they have to do something, right? It will be weird if they don't do this, right? So why wouldn't they, right? So
You're saying we should that it's expected that China would be acting to try to get a leg up on its competitors.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying normatively it's good or bad. I don't know if it's good or
Right,
bad, but
yeah, no.
factually it's just unavoidable,
is,
right?
yeah.
They have the capacity. Why not collect more data? I mean, I don't even think it's that hard, right? Especially with TikTok. I mean, how many data are generated from TikTok? I mean,
Yes.
Yeah, but exactly how consequential it is, I'm not so sure. Yeah, I mean, what's the end game? Like, what's the ultimate objective? I'm not so sure. Like economically, or is it?
I can see wanting to gain economic supremacy. What I don't get, and this is what has never made sense to me, is that if everybody says China wants to destroy the Americans, we're their biggest customer. Like, you don't want to kill your customer, right? You might want to control him, or
it depends on what how to define destroying, right? So I don't think it will be crazy for China to want another great recession in the US, because the last great recession almost killed the Chinese economy, and they have to print a lot of cash, which partly contributed to the housing crisis today. It was still sort of a leftover from the last stimulus package, because it was so big, and they built too many houses. So I don't think China would want another recession in the U.S.
Right. So China doesn't have incentive to like try to economically devastate the U.S. because that would just economically devastate themselves.
But politically, China may have an incentive to prove that democracy is bad. That's something That's something definitely. All these, like said in my video, all these countries, Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, they all have in common. They have one thing in common, is that, cognitively they want to prove to the world audience that democracy is a bad thing. So this way, their own people won't try to copy democracy, right? That's I would say the single most important thing in their mind, because imagine if you are a dictator, what's the number one thing you're worried about, right? It's,
Right.
Yeah. So
Losing
yeah,
power.
all other like economic things or other things like economic power, like growth rate, GDP, that those are secondary, right? The most important thing is that you don't end up
So
losing
how
power,
does
right?
the system work then in China from a political standpoint to keep like Chairman Xi in power? Like, is he elected by a group of yes men around him, or how? I've never studied.
Yeah,
that. How does that work?
it's kind of a complicated. It kept changing, right? Before Xi, like there was a term limit, right? There was this elder called Deng Xiaoping. You probably know him, right? Deng, he was guy. He basically, before he died, he said, the next general secretary Jiang, he can only serve 2 terms, and the one next to him can also only serve 2 terms. And he already picked Jiang's successor before he even started, right? So there was a relatively orderly transition from the guy removed by Deng during the Tiananmen, and then to Jiang, and then to Deng, and to Hu. So it's relatively orderly transition. But after Hu's term expired, things get a little messy, because firstly Deng already died, so there's no party elder to sort of arbitrate the conflict, and so the transition, who will be the next guy, it became relatively uncertain. So there was a guy, so Xi was the major competitor, but there was another guy called Bo Xilai. I don't know if you've heard of him. He tried to sort of doing all kinds of like try to appear on camera a lot and do a lot of communist events, like singing communist songs and sort of doing a lot of really visible policy innovations, and try to sort of replace Xi as the heir apparent. And that really created a lot of turmoil in the Communist Party, and also resulted in a lot of purges and things like that. So I think the party got a little nervous. They thought, maybe let's just do away with this transition thing. Let's just keep Xi in power forever. It's at least, even though it's dangerous for other party elders, because they are thinking, this person may have too much power, and maybe one day he will turn on us. Right? So they are also kind of scared, but they are even more scared of transitions, because transitions are, when you don't have elections, transitions become really messy, because
there are opportunities for power grabs from other.
Yeah. So one of the good thing about elections is that it serves as a sort of a informational, like like hint, like telling people which side has more people, which side is stronger, so the other side better not try, right? So the election party serves a informational purpose, right? But when you don't have elections, nobody knows who has more support. So different actors may try to take a bet. Maybe I'm gonna get lucky and become the general party secretary, right? So that became really dangerous for the ruling circle, right? When you have 2 people or even 3 people claim they are the top leader, that became really dangerous. So maybe, I guess, in the last few years they decided, let's just remove the term limit and let Xi do whatever he wants. So
is there then within the Communist Party, if there, because I know it makes me think a lot of Iran, right? The president just died, and there's currently this tension where the Ayatollah is trying to figure out who's the next president. And my understanding is they had this ultra conservative guy set up, and he just recently got kind of cut. Like he's not going to work out. So now it's between another ultra conservative and reformist. In China, I imagine even within a single faction of the Communist Party, there's different groups within, some that probably still want to push progress, and others that want to probably preserve. Maybe I'm incorrect in understanding that, though. Are there these different factions in that way, or?
They definitely won't make it public. Maybe there are some implicit factions, but we don't know, right? So yeah, that's partly why I didn't study Chinese politics for my PhD, because I don't like the guessing game. It might have been good for my career, because if I tell people I study China and I speak Chinese, maybe it's good for my career. But I just didn't like to study those politics behind the closed doors. It's basically just guessing, right? So there are definitely factions, I think, but not as pronounced as before, especially after Xi consolidated his power. So right now, I don't really know. I mean, even if there are factions, they won't say anything.
Just something on that note that's really annoying, and looking at like Israeli history, we're kind of spoiled in the West that when we study things like world wars, that we can go to Moscow, we can go to Berlin, we can go to London, we can open up these archives, and we could read so much information. But there are certain there are countries that are like black holes. You have no idea. People will argue over the origins of the 6-Day War, and it's like, well, here's what all the Israeli leaders thought, and then this is what we think Nasser thought in Egypt. This is what we think was going on here, but you really you just have to go by public statements, and maybe if somebody says something, you hope.
Yeah, they don't have parliamentary debate, or you don't have like
there are no archives to go through. There are no
Well, but and also the information that they put out as history to the world is like different from the information they put out to their own people for their history. So
sometimes if you don't speak the language, but oftentimes histories are, especially if you don't have an open system, I think a history is just kind of like a way for propaganda rather than just like here's an actual accounting of what happened. Yeah.
It's a method of shaping people's opinions.
Yeah. When people live in countries that have like democratic in the name, and they're clearly not, how do the citizens view that? Like, for like China, like North Korea, or do they think about that at all? Or do people like in North Korea, or do people in China, do you think they view themselves as living in a democracy? Or
I don't think they even think about it. They don't even think about that term that much. I mean, there are some intellectuals. I mean, maybe 5% of the population who debate about this and whether democracy is a good thing or things like that. But most people they don't have time to think about this. Yeah. Even Americans, how many Americans really think about is democracy a good thing or bad thing? I mean,
sure. How many when you're in these countries? Like, if you ask an average Chinese citizen, like, what does socialism mean to you? Do you think they would even have an opinion on it, or not at all? Or
I think they will be really confused. I mean, because I don't know if you came across my videos, but I think the term socialism is basically really ambiguous. Nobody can
Nowadays.
really say what it means.
Sure.
Right? Like collective ownership means production. What do you mean? Like Publix has a collective ownership of, like, can you say Publix is socialist? I don't know. It's so which countries are socialist? Like in Stalin, Soviet Union, workers are not allowed to own firms, right? So how is that socialist if workers are not allowed to own firms? I don't know. So it's a really vague term. I don't think any country's citizen can competently answer that question.
I noticed that when I was reporting on the exodus from Venezuela. I would ask people as they came across the bridge out of Venezuela into Colombia, tell me about socialism. Oh, socialism sucks. It's terrible. And what I came to realize is that they understood socialism to be that government is a bad government. But when they got to the United States, they expected the government to provide for them, and all of the things that socialism is actually about. They just figured America would do it better. They didn't understand that what you're still talking about socialism. That in our system, you don't get provided for by the government. You have to provide for yourself. You have to make a way, and it was hard for them to. It's kind of like if you've grown up in the barnyard, you're going to smell like the barnyard, but you're not going to notice it because you've lived there all your life. And so when you leave and go somewhere else, everybody else is going to notice it, but you won't. And so I wonder if people coming out of China, because I had the same conversations with them, and they're saying China's system sucks. The economy is so bad, we just can't make it there. We want to go to America because we know it'll be better in America. But I wonder if they'll end up importing their expectations of socialism or communism.
Well, I think even on that idea, like in some ways, you're right in that these words don't mean anything anymore. I feel like when I think of distinction between socialism and capitalism, I'm generally thinking of how does the investment work? So can you have private ownership or public ownership? So in the West, typically you have private investors that own firms, meaning that workers work there and they don't make money off the profits. It goes to the owners. And then how is your production determined? Like your inputs and your outputs. Is it centrally controlled? Is the government saying we need X amount of things produced for this cost? Or is it like a supply demand privately managed basically?
Free markets.
Yeah, these are the two things.
Right.
Everything else outside of that, though, I think exists on a huge spectrum. And there are more overlaps in some areas, I think, than people realize. So if you lived in the most hyper-capitalist society ever, okay, you have to go to work and you have to earn money, because if not, you're literally going to starve to death and be completely desolate on the street road. But like in the United States, that doesn't really happen, right? People don't starve to death here. Even our homeless people don't typically starve to death. You have government assistance, you've got housing provided for, et cetera. And if you were to live in the ideally like the most like hyper socialist, like communist commune in the world where there's no private ownership and everything's collectively owned, you still have to work because, well, now,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, because this motherfucker, you own part of this business. You're just as much an owner as we are, and you're dragging all of us down. And now every employee is going to hate you, not just the boss that sees you being lazy. So I think that they're like, if you're coming from these places, when I would talk to people that were coming up through Venezuela, usually the complaints were that their family wealth had been wiped out, and that things in the country becoming basically completely unaffordable. But I think there's still like a large expectation to work. I think there are some things that are missing. As an American, I would think the two biggest ones are probably any form of public transportation and socially provided healthcare are typically like givens, I think, in most Western world. Now, some people in the US might think of that as socialism. I don't think it really is at all. But those, I would imagine those would be the two most missing things. But I feel like most people would come with the expectation to work. That'd be my assumption.
Well, if you look at Panama, like Panama is pretty far on the capitalist side, especially for a Latin American country. And they don't have an unemployment system. Like if you don't work, you go hungry.
Oh, okay.
But there are parallel structures to government who fill that gap.
Sure.
The churches. So if you are broke, if you don't have a job, you've got to go to a church and ask for some charity. And the government in the United States has taken over the job of the parallel structures of government in order to use that power as a way to buy votes. This is where I think there comes more accountability when you have a personal, somebody has to go ask for some money from a family member, from a church, from a community, because that community knows that person or that family knows that person. It's you're going to take that money and go buy whiskey. I'm not giving you any money. Or, no, you really are needy. I'm going to help you. And I think we forget about that parallel structure of government that is supposed to fill that gap. But when it comes to people coming out of a culture like Venezuela, or like Cuba, like China, they want something better than what they've got. They know that the system that they're in is not providing for their needs or giving them the optimal chance to flourish. But they come to the United States, but they've not grown up in this system. So they're almost importing the expectations that they were raised with. And you've got, like I said, if you go to another country, the rules are different. You got to learn the rules of the new game and play by those rules. By and large, I think immigrants are better at that sometimes than Americans are even, of learning the rules of the new game and winning by those rules. But at the same time, I've seen it lead to, at least among the immigrant population that I spent a lot of time with reporting on them, they get real disenfranchised once they get to the United States and find out, oh, wait a minute, you've seen it just recently in New York where they're protesting outside of the hotel that they're being they're staying in for free, that the conditions aren't good enough. And Americans are going, how can you protest something that you didn't earn, you didn't pay for?
Yeah, although I will say over the past few years, a unique issue that the U.S. has run into that has to be fixed is a lot of it has to do with the asylum seeking process now is like pretty broken. Very, very broken. We've forced this problem to happen. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's push factors and pull factors, right? So we're responsible for the pull factors. And the pull factors are the reason people are not going to Canada by and large. Well, some are, but are not staying. I mean, somebody leaves Cuba, they got to go through 10 different countries before they get to the United States, any one of which speaks Spanish, which is a big plus if you come from Cuba, is not going to, persecute them if they feel persecuted in Cuba. So there's no reason for them to come all the way to the United States, except for the pull factors that bring them into the U.S.
Sure. But I think one of those really...
What do you mean pull factors?
Pull factors like the programs like we will, give you free whatever, or you can work and make $15 an hour. And some of it's lies. I mean, some of it is things that they don't actually, they cannot obtain when they get to the United States. They don't understand how expensive it is here. They don't understand the tax system. They don't understand... the things that they were sold as far as benefits of coming to the U.S. really are not going to come to fruition. And so they're forced to do things that are illegal or even a little immoral. Like I've seen a lot of migrants that go around and sign up for state programs in 3 different states. You're supposed to live in that state to get that money. But they learn how to game the system and take advantage of it when it's supposed to be there to help these people get on their feet and everything, but they kind of ruin it for everybody.
But I'm not sure I completely agree with it, because it's poor countries people from poor countries will naturally flow to people
Can't
to
blame
rich
them for
countries
that.
at a higher rate. I'm not sure there's really a policy solution to that, because it's like birds, like they fly to the south when it's cold. I'm not sure there's any way for, as long as the United States is way richer than Latin American countries. I don't
think anybody has a problem with them coming
Mm-hmm.
here. I think it's the issue of how they come here, because if we made it like we've made it so unfriendly and so difficult for you to come here legally, that's so many of them just go, well, screw it. I'm just going to go cross the southern border. I'm just going to come illegally, which is far more costly for the United States, because then they're going to be working under the table. They're not going to be paying taxes. They're going to be, there's a lot more burden that gets placed on our parallel structures.
Yeah, I think there are some pull factors that I think are good. I think there are some pull factors that are bad.
Yes.
I think that the asylum process right now in the United States is completely and wholly broken. It has to be fixed.
I agree.
The issue is, like, people are talking about border security, people are talking about wall people. It doesn't matter. You can go up to any port of entry, claim asylum, and I'm pretty sure the standing policies right now for the United States are you have to be issued a slip for a day in court if that's what you're doing. If you come to the United States, you claim asylum. And that type of pull factor is not good. I think that prior to that, my understanding is even for illegal immigrants, people that were coming to the United States were generally coming to work. Even if they were working illegally, they're coming here to work. So even the illegal immigrants that you're pulling from tend to be people that are more going to be serving as inputs to the economy.
Exactly.
They have a really hard time pulling a lot of those state benefits because for a lot of them, is as seemingly contradictory as it is, a lot of them would be fiscally positive to even the states and cities they go in, because they actually can't take out any taxes or any benefits because they don't have social security numbers. So maybe they can apply for local aid, but they end up working, getting paid under the table, and then unless they go to the hospital or something,
That's just it. We give them a court date that's 3 years from now, and we tell them you can't leave, or you have to get back at the end of the line.
But that's an issue with the asylum.
Work.
The asylum
that's
process
the
is
asylum
really,
issue.
really, really
So
bad right
screwed up.
now.
But also, it's frustrating because the bipartisan immigration bill was like the biggest reform that America's about to have in 15, 20 years or something. And it actively sought to fix the asylum rules specifically. But it got kind of struck down because it's election season, probably. Because it was a really, really solid bipartisan bill. And so there's these interesting major touch point issues that in a democracy specifically can get stymied for political gain. That's a unique problem.
You were going to say something on immigration, I think.
I'm just thinking, sometimes when we feel the current rules are broken, it doesn't necessarily we can find a better alternative, because a lot of things is it's hard to start with. Like for example, legal immigration, legal immigration are mostly for high skilled workers, right? It's very hard to I mean, how are you going to find a legal way for manual laborers to come to the U.S.? I can't think of a good policy to do that. It's just, so sometimes I mean, how do you select? Because there are so many of them. How do you select which like construction worker you want to allow into the
Camp
US?
of the Saints. I don't know if you've ever read that book, but it's a book from the 1970s or something. It's a novel. But it's basically the premise is when the third world realizes that they can invade the first world and take everything that the first world has, as long as they do it without guns, they just bring women and children, there's no way for the first world to stop them.
I don't know if I'd agree with that analysis. I think that the issue is that one frustrating thing that I run into when I'm talking about political systems, especially in the United States, is I think sometimes people confuse a divided people for a broken system. So in the United States, a lot I hear people talking about, well, do we pack the court, or how do we change Congress because we can't get legislation passed? And I think there are some structural problems that I think are legitimate to criticize. Should the House be rebalanced? Should there be more representatives since the Senate is already disproportionately representing small states? Maybe the House of Representatives can represent larger populations more fairly. Stuff like that you can talk about. But at the end of the day, right now in the United States, we have a historically divided population. We have massive opposition to each other, maybe almost as much as like in Civil War era time. We have huge oppositions. And the idea that you could just create a system that would allow stuff to fluidly pass not only doesn't make sense, it would probably be horrible. Yeah. Because if you could fluidly pass anything, imagine the difference between Biden and Trump. Like our foreign policy is already disastrous enough from one to the other. Yeah. You probably wouldn't want Trump being able to easily pass 50 bills, and then Biden comes in and easily undoes and then passes 50 more bills. Right. These are the issues that we're running into with like executive orders. Right. To center this on immigration, something that's a little bit frustrating, I think. Obviously, nobody studies or cares about economics or whatever. When people think of immigrants, people think of high-skill immigrants as high-value immigrants and low-skill immigrants as low-value immigrants. You want as many high-skill immigrants as possible. You don't really want as many low-skill immigrants as possible. That's not true. Every worker is a productive input to your economy. Mm-hmm. Low-skill immigrants are good for your economy, assuming you're not running into like disproportionate unemployment, which in the United States right now, I think our unemployment is 3.3%. It's below what a lot of economists would argue our frictional unemployment should be. And
except they're changing the way that they measure that. That's part of the reason why it's so low.
They're not. I promise they're not.
Go back and look at the 1980s.
I'm aware. So we have different ways of measuring it. I think you've got labor force participation, you've got U3, U4, U5, and U6. Whenever somebody wants to say that the unemployment is being measured in a disingenuous way, what they'll say is, well, the unemployment rate, when people say unemployment, they're usually talking about the U3 unemployment. They'll say, well, the unemployment rate isn't including this group of workers because the U3 unemployment doesn't consider discouraged workers. And they'll point to something like, oh, well, let's look at the U6 or labor force participation, which includes people that are traditionally excluded from the economy. But I promise if you Google U3 versus U6 or U3 versus LP at whatever labor force participation, the graphs have always about tracked. Like U6 is always higher than U3, but it's been more or less like the same level of tracking. You haven't seen like a huge divergence in these figures. Our unemployment today in the United States is legitimately very, very, very low. That's why there are certain sectors that have gotten pretty big boosts to wages, as much as it's hard to see because of the inflation in certain areas. But just all of that to say that like legal, I don't think there's a difficulty in bringing legal immigrants to the United States that are low skill. I think the difficulty is acknowledging that we would even want them. Because if we did want them, I mean, I'm sure we could think of ways to.
But how do you select low skilled workers?
Yeah, I mean, you could literally do it by lottery, right?
Lottery? Oh, okay.
If you really wanted to, you could literally do it by lottery.
They do. That's actually how it's done.
Yeah, but the number is very, very, very low.
Very
right
low.
now.
Very low. And the requirements are crazy.
Yeah. But you could literally say like we want 500,000 like low skilled immigrants. We're going to divvy it up like no more than 15% from each country, and then issue that in a year and just like take in as long as you have no criminal record and you can prove like work history for 3 years or something.
Yeah, that's why I sort of think, sometimes allowing illegal immigration may be a lower cost way than doing the lottery, because you're essentially screening people who are able to pass the river to
swim through the river,
like who are more determined and who can afford, like who can
working males who can do manual labor.
I know it doesn't sound like a humane thing.
There's a semi-racist joke like, why doesn't Mexico participate well in the Olympics? And it's because every Mexican that can run, jump, or swim is already in the United States. That's essentially what you're getting at.
But I mean, if you find a legal way, like a red tape procedure to screen this amount of people, I think the bureaucratic costs would be really high.
I don't know that the answer to anything is more bureaucracy. I don't know.
Well, then, but that's such an interesting argument for illegals.
Yeah,
Well,
allowing a
that's
certain
right.
amount of illegal immigration is a way to reduce bureaucracy because you're doing less.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I think that actually this problem is going to be less of a problem, even if we don't do much to fix it on its own, because of the demographic shit. The birth rate has gotten so low in the United States. We need more people to come in, or we will be.
Yeah, but people that are concerned with the demographics would absolutely reject the idea that we need to replace our demographics as they exist right now with another type of demographic. That would be the worst thing that they would ever say.
Yeah,
but I think it's important when you say that, like, well, maybe it's maybe the fiscal boon is greater because this bureaucracy would be a waste. That I don't think that means that we should just allow in all illegal immigrants. I think it means, well, we should probably revisit the bureaucratic process we have for the legal immigration, right?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying allowing all of them. Yeah, so that the open
well, you can't
border
you can't selectively allow illegal immigrants by definition.
So they did a poll in Guatemala and Nicaragua. For like 43% of the country said that they would go to the United States if they could. That'd be like 10 million people, just from those two countries.
Yeah,
I mean, if you did that in all the countries across the world.
Yeah, but if they could, but they won't.
Probably a lot of Canadians, like, to be honest, there's tons of Canadians that would love to come to America, but legally immigrating as a Canadian is really expensive and tough. And
but if you came illegally, nobody would even know, except you're just too nice.
Yeah, but Canadians would never trade up the quality of living, right? If you're an illegal immigrant, you're signing up necessarily for a significantly lower of quality living than anybody else. And a Canadian is never going to trade like universal health care and a SIN number for illegal immigration to the States, right?
Yeah.
If you ask people in China if they want to come to the U.S., you will get maybe at least $500 million. I don't know.
$500 million?
Sure. Maybe even more than that. Because I think it's just natural. Like biologically, people tend to go to richer countries, earn a higher wage.
I mean, if you offered me $3 million a year to do what I do now, if I did it in Canada, and all I had to do was jump a barbed wire fence, if you're handing out cookies, don't blame me for getting in line.
Right. Or even like if you say, like, would you guys be interested in getting prettier or getting smarter or getting more access to opportunity, like anything that's going to increase the potential of your future livelihood being happier and more successful, most people are going to want to take it. And I think for a lot of lower income countries, America obviously represents that, understandably, because the GDP is just, as much as Americans I think don't realize it, the American economy is absolutely booming. I mean, it's just very
not just that. I think there is something to be said as well that I think that the general perception is that if you live in a country in South America or in China, I would imagine that the perception there from people might be that if you come to the United States, if you're willing to work, like there's opportunity there for you. Whereas sometimes in some of these other countries, like even if you're willing to work, there might be certain things that are prohibitive to certain levels of corruption, certain levels of feeling like the government's not fair, whatever, that make it seem like you're working towards nothing. Do you think that people have that general perception? Or do you think it's literally just like a more money thing?
What do you mean toward nothing? Like
as in like so I've spoke to a few Venezuelans that came out of Venezuela after the horrible mismanagement of the economy, the oil stuff, and it felt like one of the complaints that I'd heard from two different people. I don't even talk about millions, but the big complaints that I heard from these two people were that their families' fortunes were wiped out. That their parents, they'd worked their whole lives, they'd saved money, and it was nothing. And that idea that at least there's some level of, I don't know if you say institutional stability in the United States, that a government's not just going to wipe all your stuff away or be as blatantly corrupt or whatever.
Yeah. That's why I kind of doubt the terms like socialism, because in Venezuela, how do we define? I mean, they still allow private business, right? Even in Cuba, I think they allow private business. So it's not like socialist. Their main difference is still political, right? They don't have property rights. The government can do things that, without proper authorization, they can just,
I think you could argue for Venezuela, not to do just like the Republican socialism term, but I think you could argue for Venezuela that actual like socialist policies probably led to a lot of the downfall. I think one was because the state expropriated all of the private investment in the oil sector, right? That was one thing. And then I think the government was also, in order to try to curb the rising prices, I think the government tried to dictate price via price controls, and that's why a lot of private industry fled too. I would argue that this is a form of command economy, that you have two relatively socialist practices. Yeah.
It's interesting to go to Armenia and see how the former Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Armenia was a big industrial area for the Soviet Union, so tons of factories and everything like that. And the people that worked there didn't feel any ownership in those things. It's almost like they divorced the idea of, I get money from the government every month and I go work for the government every month. Like those two things weren't connected for them or something. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in 91, they just stopped going to work and everything just froze. And like, they didn't even know who, like, I don't know who owns that now. And so all over Armenia today, there are these factories that are just empty, and they're like time capsules from 1991. You can go in there, there's calendars on the walls and typewriters and manuals on the desks and stuff that haven't even been touched. Nobody decided like, hey, let's get some stockholders and make that, like, they didn't even know how to do that. And so I wonder, like, you take the people out of the system, but they've grown up in that system. It's going to take a generation for them to figure out a different way. I don't know. What do you think?
Good question. I mean, I'm not sure if those factories are empty because there are no shareholders, or because those factories simply just don't produce things that are good for the market. I don't.
Well, they were just factories for copper mine, and there's a sheet factory, and there's a chemical plant, and there's things like that.
I think one of the issues is one of the things that capitalism does really well, especially combined with democracy, there's a famous paper, and I wish I could remember, but it went to argue that there were basically no famines in liberal democracies. Have you ever heard this expression before?
Yeah.
Because
Amartya Sen. What's Amar? Sorry, I forgot his name. He's a Nobel Prize winner.
Okay, yeah. But I think the thesis essentially was that liberal, like freedom of press, like you can. It's very visible where there are famines, and if you've got an economy that can adapt via productive inputs and outputs, then market forces can deliver food to where it's needed. I think in central planning, one issue you run into is you might have a factory that makes stuff, but how much you need to make is just dictated by the government. The government will tell you. But depending on how autistic you want to run down, there's a concept called the computation problem. And basically the idea is it's impossible to, in any central sense, to determine like what all your inputs and outputs should be. It's like it's highly variable. There's so many different things. And
it's like trying to fly a plane from the ground. You know, you can only see this much.
Yeah, right? Basically something like that. Yeah, and you've got like 100,000 different people on every part of the controls, basically. Yeah, but I think the problem is that once you have that central body that's dictating production, once that body disappears, you have no idea what you're supposed to make anymore because you don't have the same demands,
and you don't have the distribution network anymore because the government owned that too.
Yeah. So a factory might be able to produce a particular thing, but there's not necessarily an economic demand for it. The demand before was artificial; it was just called for by the government. So when the government disappears, you're like, oh well, fuck it, I guess.
Well, it's kind of like in China, I guess, that they control where people can put their capital, and so real estate was one of the things where they could put it. So they built like a crap ton of apartment buildings.
But that was also for China and their real estate development. That wasn't done in response to like consumer demand for a place to live, right? That was them building cities, and they're like, well, people will probably move here, or well, hopefully people. And then it was just like completely like it just didn't happen.
Well, it was one of the few places you could invest money to try to build wealth.
Sure.
And so and of course, I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but it seems to me that China's national motto should be, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And if you get caught, you're not trying hard enough. Because, for example, in the United States, it's kind of become synonymous to say, if you buy a product that's cheap, that's not very good quality, you say, oh, that's just Chinese, just junk. Because we get flooded with all sorts of Chinese stuff over here. In Panama, it's even worse. They have people die from Chinese knockoff Colgate toothpaste that instead of putting propylene glycol in there, they put antifreeze in. And people use it and died, but it was cheaper, right? Or like I bought a extension cord from a Chinese hardware store, and I was going to splice it into something else. When I cut it open, it didn't have any wire in it. It just had like sand inside there. There was literally no wire in the thing. And it's like there's a whole different level of cheap Chinese junk that is sold in other places around the world outside the United States. It's not that China can't produce high quality stuff. I mean, DJI drones are Chinese and they're very good. But what I'm told is that the lowest, cheapest, worst quality level of product is reserved for selling inside China. It's like...
Yeah, that bothered me a lot when I was in China. I think it may have something to do with the size, because different Chinese regions are essentially selling products to each other. So they're sort of like cheating each other in a way. Like, because I noticed there's some when I buy some stuff from the store, if it's made in Vietnam or made in some other poor countries like Bangladesh, normally the quality is okay. But I tend to not buy things from China, partly because I think when you have such a big domestic market and there's no customs between different provinces, and people just, it creates sort of a prisoner's dilemma, right? Because everyone, if I don't cheat you, maybe you would cheat me. So it creates kind of a bad equilibrium. Like people just sort of selling things to each other, and even milk powders, even things like that are unsafe. So
I hate that people don't recognize how important institutions are for ensuring some level of fair play, because people don't realize that, you do run into a prisoner's dilemma. Like, not everybody's going to remember every bad
like
product.
a recent Supreme Court case about the
like
regulation.
But
So,
I mean, that's one of the things people like about America. They may not be able to understand that that's what they're coming for, but what they're really coming for is maybe not so much I can make more money. It's that there's a system in place that will be much fairer,
stability
so that
of the
my work
institutions.
will be rewarded in accordance with the amount of
the like
value that I
stable
provide.
institutions in and of
Right.
itself is this like privilege that I think it's one of the most important privileges, like especially just as a Canadian. I feel like sometimes when I listen to Americans complain about American stuff, there's lots of things to complain about, but I'm like, this is like such an Americanism, right? Like I'll like talk to somebody and they'll be like, obviously this is better. And I'm like, well, it's just different. It's just different. It has its own problems. You just don't realize that because you're kind of like America brained a little bit. Like even the fact that I don't even think about this. Most democracies are young. Israel isn't that young of a democracy when you compare it to global democracies. But to me, it's a baby because the Canadian and American and British democracy systems are so old comparatively. And it probably creates this like major bias where we like take things like stability of institutions for granted because we can't, our ancestors' can't remember what it was like when like some semblance of institutional stability existed.
You ever seen the movie Bruce Almighty?
Maybe long time ago.
Jim Carrey and
God.
Jim Carrey.
It's like
he's
Noah
God.
or whatever. God.
There's a stupid quote I think he says at the very end. I think it's Bruce Almighty, but the quote from God, Morgan Freeman, is that I think when you've done things right, people won't think you've done anything at all. As God, I think one of the big problems our institutions have is that when they do things right, it's hard to notice, but if they get something wrong, it's very evident. And people will take for granted some of the benefits, and if they see a wrong thing, they're just like,
especially foreign policy. Well, when there's a war, everybody will be like, look what the United States have done. But the thing is, there's so much fewer wars today compared to any time in the past. So, but people don't notice the countries that are not fighting wars, right? The countries that are deterred by the United States from fighting wars, right? They won't notice it because they're just there. They're not in the news cycle. They're not on the headlines.
They don't notice the global trade that's made possible by the Pax Americana, which is kind of going away, and that's not a good thing. I mean, we've for 70 years have been providing safety on the seas for all manner of trade from all countries to all countries, and everybody has benefited from it because we were the big, the big guy in the room. We could guarantee that kind of security, and there are a lot of Americans now that don't want to do that. They want to become more isolationist.
Look how many U.S. bases around the world. I was like, are you crazy? You don't want those bases? What would happen? Like about the pirates? How about what are they going to do about it?
I feel like America's power as being like the global hegemon and like essentially like some level of global police is very misunderstood because nobody can really picture life before it, and like NATO's policing power as well. We just can't really.
Yeah, it's like a dirty cop, right? But you have a dirty sheriff in this town, but what will happen if you remove that sheriff?
You have no sheriff. Yeah.
So, so of course we want a better sheriff. We want the sheriff to behave better. Maybe we want to incentivize him to behave better. But you can't just kick out the sheriff and just
That's
do
well
without
said.
it. Yeah.
Well said.
It's annoying that also just because of like psychology of numbers and everything too, it's hard to see. There are certain damages that would be caused that are very visible, and then certain benefits that are almost invisible. Like if I tell you that at the cost of 1,000 American jobs, I can make it so that the increase in the cost of a particular good or service next year, instead of increasing by 4%, it'll increase by 1%, and the overall amount of money saved by people in the United States would be massive. The only thing people see is the loss of those 1,000 jobs. And you say, but look at how much money we saved. I'm like, what do you mean? It still went up. Okay, but not as much as it would have gone up. And
Right.
like that's like you're already like in the weeds and lost on some stats argument there, and it's
Yeah.
very difficult. Yeah, when you argue about like NAFTA or now it's U.S. Mexico Canada trade agreement or whatever, people will see the losses. You know, you look at like Detroit manufacturing, like it's obviously this deal is horrible, and it's like okay, but like compared to what? Like it's like
that's partly I was really disappointed at Bernie Sanders. Like he was like all in against NAFTA and free trade. But if you really want to bring those Mexican jobs or Bangladesh jobs back into the United States, like how much each shirt is going to cost you? I mean, it's not sustainable. It's not something like even remotely like beneficial.
I also think that people don't realize they don't realize the importance of having some influence because it blocks other influence. I didn't understand this back when pro gaming was a thing in 2011, 2012. Every single streamer I saw had like a SteelSeries or a Razer sponsorship. When you looked at them, they all wore these headphones. And I remember asking one of the marketing guys on the team I was on, I was like, there's no way it's profitable to sponsor this guy. And they're like, oh yeah, well they just give him gear. And I was like, okay, but like why would you even give this guy's 20 viewers? Why would you give him a free set of headphones? And he's like, well, because for every person that's wearing SteelSeries headphones, that's a Razer headphone that he's not wearing. It's a blocker. And when you look at things like the TPP that I know everybody celebrated when it died, and it's like, listen, if there are certain agreements you don't like, renegotiate them. But the problem is people think that America can just withdraw from some stage and then it'll be neutral, but it won't be neutral.
It won't be. Somebody's
China's going to be
fill it.
there. Iran's going to be there. Russia's going to be there. Right? These are the people that are going to step up. So don't compare America to no America. You have to compare America to China influence or America to Russia influence.
You can complain about the policeman, but if you just get rid of the policeman, you're going to get a Russian policeman or an Iranian
There'll be a policeman.
Yeah, you'll have local militia.
So
after
who
that,
do you prefer?
Yeah.
China was thrilled when TPP died, when the
I
U.S.
know.
withdrew from TPP because because at first China sort of panicked when Obama first was talking about joining TPP because I mean there will be a lot more trade between the U.S. and Vietnam, South Korea, and Malaysia. So China would be would have lost a lot of market, but
huge market.
Yeah, but,
for listeners, can
yeah.
you guys just make sure that you define like the TPP and like what it is and
yeah.
just so that people understand the countries that are involved with this
It's
agreement.
called a Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's basically a trade agreement between a lot of Pacific countries, including North America, South America, and Southeast Asia, and Japan, South Korea, and so it's. But the funny thing about TPP is that they have a certain sort of a what do you call certain standard, right? They require your market to be open to a certain extent before they allow you into the TPP, and China doesn't meet that standard, right? So that's why China really sort of panicked.
They also require, there are other restrictions too based on like how you could treat your labor. Like I know more specifically for Vietnam, there were a lot of labor reforms that were like on the precipice in order for them to meet the standards. Because if you join if you join a partnership with one country, that country doesn't want to have their workers necessarily competing against other workers that can work for 50 cents a day. So they would demand certain standards because labor unions were involved in negotiating parts of that as well. So, but all of that basically went out
And maybe I actually don't remember because this was before I was super like thinking politically. Why did Trump pull? Like,
Trump takes credit
what's
for
the
it.
Republican argument? Because it's more Republican side that wanted to
but
pull.
Bernie Sanders wanted to pull too. Yeah.
Okay.
So
what are the
yeah.
arguments against the TPP?
It was
Like,
also, that was
why?
dead under Obama though, I think TPP.
No, it wasn't.
You don't think so? I feel like almost all the support for that was basically gone by the time Obama was out of office, and then Trump came in and he took credit for killing it. But you think it was still on the table?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't. Yeah, that's my impression, but maybe I could be wrong. Yeah, but that's the first policy Trump ever signed. The first day, right? He went into the White House, and the first thing he signed was to quit TPP. So that's how I felt. This guy must have some business relationship with China. Otherwise, why would he be so so into that, right? So and that's also the reason I felt really bad about Bernie Sanders the first time, because he raged against the TPP and NAFTA and everything. So like this guy, either he doesn't know anything or he has some agenda. I don't know, because I think their argument is that America will lose more jobs, right? America will import more things and lose more jobs. But those things will be imported one way or another, right? If you don't import from Vietnam or South Korea, you're going to import them from China. So it's not like you can just do away with them. It's not an option, right? So I think it's pretty obvious. I don't know why.
I think there are two big arguments that populists fall on. The left, I think, tends to argue from a labor perspective, which I would argue is economically misguided. But yeah, it's the idea that, well, I don't want my jobs going overseas. I don't want to compete with this other country. But the issue with that is the same issue with tariffs. It's like you can try to tariff a country, but you're going to get it from some other place. You might even get it from the same place and not realize it because it comes through another place. It's very, very, very hard to protect an entire industry just by not having one trade agreement or through one tariff. And then the right makes arguments, in my opinion, again, also dumb. I think they usually make arguments relating to like sovereignty. Like, well, I don't want to be part of this huge trade bloc. I want to be able to write my own trade deals, or I don't want to be beholden to any of these other foreign people. I think that was a big part of the public argumentation for Brexit. Well, we don't want to have to negotiate deals with the rest of Europe. We want to be able to do it ourselves and figure our own deals out. But I mean, in practice, it's not like you can negotiate a better deal on your own and you end up having to agree to essentially whatever those markets. It's not like the UK is going to dictate to the entire European Union like their new market standards. So they're going to be bought into all the standards anyway. They just have no say over it now. But I think for populist figures, I think that's like the left, I think, comes at it from a labor perspective, however misguided. And then the right usually comes at it from, they'll use the labor too, but then also like the sovereignty idea that we don't want to hand over the reins of our economy or our freedom to some other trading bloc.
That we didn't vote for.
Essentially, yeah. But the big issue, in my opinion, is that there's no way to disconnect global markets, and you're always going to be connected one way or another. So better to have a say than to not have a say. Like your worst nightmare is always, like I say this for election times too, especially when like progressives threaten to withhold their vote. Like your worst nightmare is you withhold your vote for something, and then they win anyway, and they're like, oh well, we don't have to listen to you guys at all. So kick rocks, and then they go and they do their own thing. Like, oh okay. Yeah, that's the scary thing, is that when you withdraw from that and then those people do their own things, well, now you're not even a consideration. So let's say there is a huge trading bloc that you didn't want to be a part of. Let's say that in the UK, let's say that they make a new decision, for the European Union where, well, we're going to make this restriction on whatever. The UK has no saying in that now, except for whatever they can negotiate unilaterally, which puts them in a much tougher spot.
Yeah.
So it's funny because Trump's argument for Brexit is that when they don't have a large union, we were able to bargain with them easily. But if that's the argument, it should mean that it's bad for the UK, right? Because,
yes, if it's in our interest, it's not in theirs.
So but both countries use the same, use sort of the same argument to promote Brexit. So I don't know what's going on.
Brexit and Trump, I think, were, even if it didn't seem like it, they were very closely tied together. I think in terms of like populist worldwide sentiment. Sticking it to the man.
I'm super curious a bit about when you mentioned that the provinces within China will kind of send each other the worst stuff because of that kind of prisoner dilemma. Why? And this is, I'll be super clear. I have no knowledge on particularly the domestic workings of Chinese politics and economics. But how does because in my mind, the CCP should be taking some role of kind of safeguarding and insisting, particularly, I guess, in my mind as a command of
interstate commerce
interstate commerce. So how are these provinces kind of able to undercut each other despite a command economy?
Yeah, it's. I would say maybe it's just because it's hard. There was one of the head of the Chinese equivalent of FDA. He was actually executed for corruption a few years ago, not maybe 10 years ago. So he was executed. It's not very normal for a high level official to be executed, but I mean, China has a lot of executions, of course, but it's not very normal for such a high level official to get executed. So that means the central government did want to play a role. I mean, they probably worried that like if people don't have the sense of security, I mean, eventually it will turn into dissatisfaction and maybe even protest. I don't know. But I don't know. It's just hard, because eventually you need those local officials to enforce your law, and the local officials sometimes they don't have the incentives. Because I mean the corruption in countries like China and Russia are very different from corruptions here. A lot of Americans I talk to, they're like, oh, we have corruptions too. It's everywhere. Yeah. But it's very different because here you have a lot of third party, like, because what we call it, a fire alarm system, like in political science, right? Because you have people who will like the third party, not just their employers, but the media, the voters, or the affected people. Like sometimes we see in the highway there some trucks saying, "Am I a good driver?" So that's a sort of example of fire alarm system. You rely on third parties to report your corruption because the boss don't have time to audit everything like in the localities, right?
Or like reviews on eBay or something where you get customer reviews.
Although none of that matters anymore, but in
theory.
theory.
But in theory.
In China or Russia, nobody has the guts to report their local official. Are you crazy? If you do that, God knows what will happen to you, right? And most likely the person who reported will learn your report very soon. And so there are people who try to file petitions or anything.
But is there not a sort of an underlying? I don't know. I mean, what's the moral underpinning in China? The world that holds up your worldview, that everybody shares, that says it's wrong to do this, it's wrong to do that. Is it more like, because like our country is founded on, I guess, what you'd call the golden rule: do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Treat people the way you'd like to be treated. That's kind of the foundational precept of our country. What I've noticed is that in a lot of other countries, like Afghanistan, for example, it's more like do unto others before they do unto you. Like get him before he gets you, cheat him before he cheats you. And I could be wrong about that, but I don't know enough about Chinese culture to know what is the foundational precept morally that would allow somebody to look themselves in the mirror knowing that I just sold a batch of toothpaste to somebody that's full of antifreeze. It's going to kill a bunch of people, but I got a good deal. I made some money on it. Like, how do you look yourself in the mirror?
Well, as someone who studied political institutions, I tend to avoid explaining things through culture, because I feel like cultures are not that different. I feel like it's more about constraints, right? If Americans one day lose these constraints, would they refrain from cheating each other? I doubt it.
No, I don't think so.
So I think
I disagree on that. We'll argue about it on our
Wait,
episode.
really? You think Americans would?
I feel like cultural things can pretty heavily inform.
Oh, that part, yeah.
Like I would argue that was part of the big mission failures in the Middle East, is the idea that everybody wants to have like a representative democracy and to go about voting in that way. And I think that different cultures lend themselves towards different styles of governance and can move with it. But we might agree more than I do.
But maybe the culture is the constraints that you're talking about. Like in the American culture, there's like social constraints necessarily applied, which might lead to the system constraints that we also have.
And when it comes to corruption and cheating and selling bad products, I'm not sure that's a culture thing. I mean, it happened in the U.S. history. Like there are some some chemical plants might poison like the population around it, things like that. I mean, I'm not sure culture can really effectively constrain people's behavior. Maybe to a certain extent, but when they lose the deterrence, when they lose the institutional deterrence, it's kind of hard.
When it comes to just like on the particular corruption thing, my guess is going to be that certain constraints, systems will help to reduce some forms of corruption. But when it comes to corruption in particular, there are certain things that would lend itself towards corruption in every culture. And a few of those things, my guess is going to be, this is true of an American as it is, I would guess, for a Chinese person, is I'm sure in China there are shitty products that are sold. But I'm sure that there are people that make those products that have friends or family that tell them like, don't buy that shit. Like, that's fucking horrible. Don't buy this shit here. Trust me, this is not good, right? When it comes to corruption, I think a few of the psychological factors are at play. One is you're scamming people that are farther away from you. You're not scamming your own family, it's other people. Two, depending on where you're at, you have people that are reliant on you. So it's, people say, how could you work in a call center and scam people? And it's like, I have children to feed. So you. I am going to scam people, right?
Of course, yeah.
Or if you're a small business owner, and it's like, well, how are you going to, why would you sell this product like this? I got 150 employees that all have families. What, do you want me to just be a better person and go out of business? And now all these people, right? So that's two, is the people that are relying on you. And then I had a third factor. I just pulled a Biden. One was you probably don't scam people near you. Two is that you have people that are reliant on you.
Is it like anonymity of like distance? Like in the case of transport, you can transport goods so quickly that there's like...
Oh, no. Okay. Third is that because of the way the system is set up, if you don't do it, somebody else is going to anyway.
Yeah.
I doubt that in any of these areas, nobody is probably uniquely corrupt. They're probably just in a system where everybody else is doing essentially the same thing. So of course you're going to enter the market and perform about the same.
Yeah, that's why I called it prisoner's dilemma, right?
Yeah.
So it's if you sell good quality product, you may end up getting out of business because you can't compete with the bad. It's not that people don't want.
It's Moloch's game. If you don't do the bad thing, you're going to get you're going to get screwed on.
What makes me wonder about how
stuff.
this is part and parcel of Chinese culture specifically is because the government engages in cheating so much, like all around the world. There was this guy that I talked to in Africa that they were putting up windmills. Siemens did the software for the windmills, and China came in and bought one windmill, and next thing you know, they've reverse engineered the whole thing, and they're selling the exact same thing, same software, same code, same everything, under a Chinese brand. And the government was like totally involved in that. Like they have been involved in this massive scheme of industrial espionage and corporate espionage, where they're hacking into websites and stealing not military secrets, corporate secrets.
I think that goes back to a deterrence thing that we spoke about earlier. Why wouldn't you? If the United States isn't going to do anything about it, if companies can't punish you for it, then why would you not engage in the behavior? There's huge rewards to be reaped.
That's why I was asking about like what's the moral underpinning there, because
but if you explain it culturally, then what about Taiwan? Because Taiwan doesn't have the same kind of reputation, right? They make pretty good products, right? They sell high-end products,
and they don't cheat and steal and
not that I know. Right? If I go to an Asian market and if I want to buy some sauce, I would prefer buying those made in Taiwan. Yeah. Because I feel pretty confident about their quality. So
right.
And what about difference between say North Korea and South Korea, right? So it's definitely not culture, right? So even East Germany and West Germany still have a lot of difference today, right? East Germany is more likely to vote for far right, far left parties, and but I don't think it's culture, right? It's the same culture, right? So it's just the institution, even if it is culture, maybe their culture was
shaped
contaminated by the institutions, right?
Yeah.
So
it's kind of
it seems like
that
guilt-based versus shame-based culture, where if you don't get caught, then it's not wrong.
Yeah, but shame, a lot of these things are more measuring differences than people realize. Like when people why is it that you can buy a steak at IHOP or Denny's and be happy with it, even though it's so much worse than a steak that you get at like a Ruth's Chris, right? Well, because when you buy the steak at Denny's, you expect a Denny's steak. You know you're getting steak at dinner. Yeah. When people think about shame and stuff, I think shame comes from the difference between the expectation of behavior versus the behavior itself. But if you enter a market where everybody's behaving in a particular way, well, I mean, what is the shame of behaving in that?
There's no shame in it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You go to Thailand and people send their daughters to be prostitutes because there's no shame in it in their culture, the way they look at it.
Is that really true in Thailand? That sounds pretty
I feel
acceptable.
like there's shame in
There
it.
must be. No?
There has to be.
No, I mean, there really isn't. I mean, they don't see it. It's like being a dental assistant, like to go work in the go-go bars or whatever. For a lot of the girls, their families will actually say, well, why don't you go work in a massage parlor or something? And because their moral standards regarding that particular thing are just different than ours. I did a documentary about this. It's fascinating. I talked to these girls, and they're just like, "Oh yeah, my folks told me to come do this."
I'm so curious about like when you're, because I think like part of what I think happens in conversations like this is like things like culture. It's possible that we're like all using slightly subjectified definitions when we mean culture, but also shame, I think, can be used in that. For example, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that the families like broadly would agree that it would be more respectable if their daughter was a dental assistant than a prostitute, but they're destitute, they need the money, and it's kind of like they're around a bunch of peers that are doing it. So it's like,
that's my point.
They're not ashamed because it's like normalized within their culture, but they're also...
But I would even be careful when you say normalized in the culture. It's just normalized in the system
in the
right now
system that they
Right.
exist within. But like most of them would probably all agree it would be better if it was not this way. Like,
Given the choice, they would rather their kid go to college and be a dentist or even a secretary, perhaps.
Right.
But because it's so common, even a lot of the Venezuelan girls that we talked to in Cartagena, like I support a bunch of them that don't want to be prostitutes, but all their friends are, and they don't have anything else to sell. And so among their group of people, it's just a thing. It's just, it's just what you do. You do what you got to do.
right.
And I don't fault them for that.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that the morality about sex is a little different from morality about, say, cheating or things like that, because sex doesn't really hurt anyone. I mean, potentially it increases the risk of women getting hurt, but it's not like a crime. It's a victimless thing, right? So it's not like selling fake milk powder. It's so the sexual morality may be like more diverse. I mean, across different cultures. Some countries may care about sex more than others, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to selling fake products, I think it's pretty universal. I think every country will consider it a bad thing. There's no...
Yeah, but I feel like if the expectation is there, I feel like in Israel, there's one of the cities I was going to call Kfar Qasim, there's a market, and in the market, everything there is counterfeit. And like my Palestinian friends tell me, it's all counterfeit. We like everybody knows it's counterfeit, but it's cheap as fuck. So you buy it with the understanding that like it might not work, or you might throw it out.
Market in Bangkok's that way.
Okay.
Or Hong Kong.
Yeah. So it's just a counterfeit, but like people like buy like whatever. Yeah.
Just want to be sensitive to time.
Okay.
It's 2:05.
205. Yeah.
I'm very interested about the demographic issues that China is facing.
Like with birth rate specifically?
Yeah, because I don't know that they'll
plummeting.
ever be able to recover from the one-child policy, and I don't know. I mean, you ever listen to Peter Zeihan?
I knew you were gonna bring him up. Yeah.
Yeah,
He talks a lot about demographics.
Yeah, he talks a lot about it, and his thesis is that they're kind of in terminal decline, and almost like China's not an issue anymore because they're not even going to be around.
I'm always so skeptical about China stuff because even for me, I'm 35. Even since from I was a kid, I remember always hearing it constantly oscillates between China is on the verge of becoming a global threat and they're going to take over the whole world, to China is on the verge of collapse. Like the Belt and Road Initiative is letting China take over all of Africa, to Xi Jinping actually can't manage anything and it was a total disaster, to the Chinese economy is booming, the middle class is demanding democracy more than ever, to the Chinese government and the unlimited terms are now ruling them. It's just like, I don't know.
How much of that is
You can
caused
hear
by-
that like at the same time today. Do a Google search on China.
Is
you
that
hear-
because of like authoritarian black holes though, like of info? Like
No,
is
I think
that
it's
in
because when
part
people make
caused by that?
predictions about things, people don't realize that they're trying to predict things in highly dynamic environments.
Yeah.
It would
Oh,
be
I
like
see.
me saying, like, if I were to stab this guy if I were to stab you in the arm every single day, with a pocket knife, eventually you're going to get stabbed like 100 times. You're going to die. And I might make a whole prediction and like a whole school of thought off of this. And then in the real world, we see how that plays out. And in the real world, I stab you one time and then you just stop coming back. And it's like, oh. And I feel like, yeah, there's so many conditions that
There's
can
like
change.
1,000 things that can happen tomorrow that we can't plan for.
Exactly, yeah.
That's why I don't like to make predictions about stuff.
Yeah. Or when people do historical counterfactuals, like, oh, well, if we would have just done this or just done that, it's like, bro, a million things. Who the f knows? Like,
That's right.
What do you think is like the healthiest or best change right now that America could make to its system of governance? You had to pick one.
No, I think the thing is the U.S. constitutions are really rigid. You need 2/3 of Senate and 2/3 of House, and you need a certain amount of states to rectify. I'm not sure, it's even remotely possible to change the electoral system. At least the variables that I'm familiar with. There may be some incremental policy change that's possible, but
I'm saying, let's say you can wave a wand. You're the
wave a wand.
What would you? What do you think
I
would
would
be the best
change it to maybe a parliamentary system, like where the president doesn't have a fixed term and it can be removed anytime as long as they lose the confidence.
Would there be a max limit to the president's term and no minimum, or just no limit at all?
No minimum. Because right now the minimum is 4 years.
Right.
No minimum. There should still be a maximum. I think maybe not necessarily 8 years. If a parliamentary system, you can be a little loose. Maybe go up to 12 or something. Most parliamentary systems don't even have a term limit because they won't stay long anyway. So yeah, but I think a minimum of 4 years is a little too long. People can make a lot of mistakes in 4 years. Like, if you messed up in 2 years, I think you should just pack and leave. That's okay. I would say, yeah.
You think it would lead to basically greater leader accountability?
Yeah. And also, it's hard to have a sort of a self-coup, right? So we call it the self-coup. Because some presidents, when they turn crazy, when they appointed a lot of people, a lot of loyalists in the government, they can easily just stage a coup, maybe even close the parliament, or maybe even arrest a lot of people or things like that. But in a parliamentary system, it's really hard, because before you can do that, the parliament would be scared. Those legislators would think, okay, what if I'm the next victim? So we'd better remove you before you do anything further.
Okay. I'm curious about this counter. So this is a really common counter I hear in Canada against a parliamentary system, which is that while it is possible that we could, vote Trudeau out anytime, within the House, there's a massive incentive to never cross the 50% threshold, because a revote doesn't just mean that the prime minister's seat is up for question. It means every House sitter, which is why in Canada, we almost never drop below 50%. We'd rather stalemate and just make your bill never happen until you disappear, and we just forget about it, right? Which leads to basically House electorates at certain times actually representing loyalty to the prime minister more than to their constituents that voted for them, right? Which leads to this massive problem of essentially, I think of SNC-Lavalin. Are you guys familiar? I'm sure you're familiar. Matt, are you familiar with the SNC-Lavalin scandal in Canada? It's a massive scandal that came out about Trudeau. It was unquestionable about basically SNC-Lavalin. It's, I believe, a Canadian corporation. And they were doing a whole bunch of business fraud, foreign. And they were supposed to be charged, and because Trudeau had basically this somewhat incestuous relationship with them, he asked them to be pardoned, and the staffer that was responsible for making that decision was like, no, stood up in parliamentary and said, I was asked to pardon these people, I will not be. And she was basically pressured by the whole House to step down because nobody wanted to revote, because it was within a year of him first being elected, right? And so you have this situation where you're like, okay, it's supposed to be able to oust him, but in that way, the entire electorate House protected him from something that probably should have gotten him kicked out, because they didn't want to lose their seat 1 year after re-election, because it was a very turbulent re-election as well that year.
Yeah, but how would the presidential system help in that
I'm
case?
not sure. It's not. The counter isn't to say, so we should go for presidential. My question is is there any counter? Because you're giving the pro of the parliamentary system is saying well, you can oust the leader, but I'm saying doesn't really happen very often because there's incentives not to.
Yeah, the classical way classical solution is just to make the election more proportional, so there are more small parties. Right now, Canada only has 3 major parties. So if you adopt this sort of Western European like the system, like the German system, or the Norway or Finland, or the proportional systems, not necessarily like the Israeli kind is too extreme, right? There's one district for the whole country, but you can at least make some districts, right? Maybe divide the country into, say, 20 districts, and each district has maybe 5 or 6 legislators, and they divide the seats proportionally according to their votes, right? This way, they don't have to have a high regional concentration. They can have some votes here, some votes there, and they can still get a couple of seats, right? So this way, when you have more than 3 parties, then of course the prime minister will have a harder time staying in power, because you have to sort of satisfy multiple parties, right? So yeah, and that's the most common solution to this, right? And of course, a lot of people don't like it because they are worried about frequent elections. But yeah, it's a matter of taste. Personally, I don't mind frequent elections.
This was a bit brought up in our last discussion, Chuck. So I'm going like way back. But I think you released a video on dating and masculinity actually recently as well. So you might actually have some thoughts as well. But are you guys familiar with the red pill?
Red pill?
Great. Okay.
Yeah, red pill.
I mean,
think
from the movie Matrix? Is it?
That's where it originally stems from, but it's like a dating concept now as well.
It's a dating concept? I thought it means like a conspiracy, like means like everything media tells you is...
That's also part of the red pill now.
Yeah.
People use it in different media spheres.
I haven't been dating for more than 30 years. So.
Super fair.
Online, there was with the rise of Andrew Tate, there was a whole bunch of dating advice given, and people called it the red pill, and it's much like hyper masculine for youth kind of stuff like that.
Yeah, the Andrew Tate ilk of masculinity, and it's super interesting.
Disgusting to me, actually.
Yeah.
What's the specific arguments like?
Well, I actually have a question, because when we were talking about it, you were talking about there's 3 things. I think you said 3 or 2 things that are most important as a soldier. And one of them that you listed is like the love for your brothers. It's discipline and love for your brothers, right? And one of my biggest frustrations when I listen to like a lot of these guys talk about masculinity is it's fully devoid of like any level of like emotionality or loyalty or honor, like any of these like older kind of traditions within masculinity, even though it's really common. And I'm just super curious, like,
and that's Andrew Tate's red pill version of masculinity, or what? Because that's not masculinity at all. But
I think like a lot of these guys that are like the alpha male types tend to like they really hollow out what it means to be a man, which is always interesting because they feel like they're the most masculine. But then when you get into like military spaces, which I think most people would agree is very traditionally masculine, you see most military types like hating everything that they're talking about. What would you say within the military is like portrayed as like healthy masculinity? And like, how does that include things like talk about it and like love for your brothers, things like that?
You get me going on this, I'm going to go. So I want to hear what you have to say first.
Okay. Yeah. I honestly, for the life of me, I don't understand the appeal of Andrew Tate. I mean, everything he says doesn't make sense at all. What kind of people buy that? I don't like.
Young people who are inexperienced buy into the power fantasy, I think.
And lost young men, particularly.
Yeah, but the thing is,
incel
the power is a zero-sum game, right? If Andrew Tate has more power over women, then you have less power, right? So if people like Andrew Tate...
Nobody thinks about that. When I was on the Fresh and Fit podcast, like I asked him, I was like, I understand what you guys are advocating for, like having multiple girlfriends and all this, but like, you understand that like for your audience, like only 1% or less could ever do this. I'm like, yeah, we know. Our advice is for them. But then I look at the audience, well, then why the are most of you guys listening to this?
Yeah,
like,
it's
I just don't think
20,000 listening.
The delusion is the I had an argument with Sneeko for like 10 minutes over this one word, because I was like, you realize like not everyone can do this. He's like, no, but anyone can do this. And I'm like, okay, so you're giving advice to an audience with the expectation that only 1% of them can follow through. And it's like, well, any of them could, and it's like 100% of them could. But it's like, yeah, it's not rational.
It's mathematically. I don't see how it. Yeah.
Look, when it comes to dating, my belief is that women are hardwired to need 3 things from a man. This is one of the things when I wrote my book, Making Men, I put together like a 5-step process. Every guy at some point in his life starts to ask himself, like, how do I know that I've made it to manhood, that I've got what it takes? How do I know that I'm there? You know, I was 35 years old, and I was like, people are, how do I show everybody that I'm a man? You know, that I'm not a young man anymore. I'm an adult man, and I wanted to give my sons a kind of a yardstick, something that when they started to ask that question, I could say, okay, here's what a man actually looks like. A man is somebody who is submitted to a higher purpose. A man is somebody who treats things that are important like they're important and treats things that are worthless like they're worthless. A man is somebody who looks around him and makes the world a better place, like looks for ways to make things better. A man is a guy who dies to his own desires to provide for the needs of people under his care. A man is somebody who engages in every facet of his life. Instead of being passive, he's powerful because he's engaged, because he's doing stuff to improve the world. And when I went around the world and spoke on that topic for about 10 years, every time if I spoke to a group that had a bunch of young men in it, I'd have a line of young men at the end that wanted to ask me questions. And I got the same question over and over again so many times. I wrote a whole nother book about it called Prowess. But the questions were like, how do I know she's the right one? Or how do I find a girlfriend? Like, I'm 20 something years old and I don't know really how to talk to girls. I don't like, it's the same thing I think that Andrew Tate is trying to answer with these guys that are basically, they've been interacting with devices their whole lives, and they haven't learned that real nuanced art of interacting with the opposite sex. And I saw this in my own sons. You know, they got to the age where they're interested in girls and they're just like, they look like total retards with these. And I just like, oh geez, son, oh wait, stop, just, oh man, so I spent like a couple of years studying this and talking to people and trying to put together an answer to those questions I kept getting. And what I came up with was that a woman is hardwired to need 3 things from a guy: provision, protection, and affection. Now, don't hear me saying that a woman can't provide for herself, can't protect herself, okay? But in the natural order of things, men were made bigger and stronger, men were made more aggressive, men were made more risk tolerant for a reason, because they're made to step out front and protect and provide and give affection. Now, in a perfect world, a healthy relationship, a girl's going to get those things from her daddy. And she's going to learn her worth through the interaction she has with her dad as he protects and provides and gives her affection. And then at some point, there will come along a man who will take that job away from dad and will provide those things for her himself. But because we live in a society that encourages men to be passive, encourages passivity, it's our natural bent. I mean, we lean that direction anyway. But the world says, like, don't do anything dangerous. Like, don't get out there and get, just, it tries to make second-rate girls out of men, really. I mean, it's, in a way. Guys are afraid to take that position, to go like, hey, I will be the one who, I'll give my life for you. So if you ask, like, how the military, builds a picture of manhood in a way that's going to make good leaders, that's going to make soldiers who win on the battlefield. The good leader is a selfless leader, is the leader who gives himself for his men. So, for example, there's these little traditions in the military that you wouldn't get other places. Like the commander eats last. When we're out in the field and we've all been sleeping in mud puddles and, patrolling all day or doing what we do, and the chow shows up, the leaders always eat last. Always. The mission comes first, my men come second, and I come last. So if I try to translate that to the dating scene, what that comes out to in my mind is my job for the woman that I love is to give myself for her. She's not here to serve me. I'm here to serve her. And if I can build for her an environment where she can paint the story of her life, where she can live out the purpose for which she was created in a safe, protected environment, she's going to give me everything I ever wanted in life.
Can I ask you about one thing? So one thing that in your story is really actually atypical of what I think most people, not just the right people, but everyone would call masculinity, which is like providership. So having a good job that brings in a solid income. But you actually traded stock brokerage for writing, which is in many ways, that's completely flipping the script, right? That's like you're staying at home, you're writing, which is often viewed as like probably not a mask job or whatever.
Right.
And also, as much as like we talk about like the selfless man, selflessness sometimes leads to like also not talking about it, which is also really important.
Yeah.
So like, how did those things come into your life and story, despite in many ways that not being the script for what you're kind of handed as a dude?
Because providing for my wife and my family has to do with a whole lot more than just bringing in a paycheck. It's providing that environment, that a safe place for them to grow. And me going out and making a whole bunch of money, but not being there. So my kids knew there was this guy that lived in the house named Dad, but they didn't know who he was. That's not providing. I wasn't fully providing. I was just giving them money. I was buying their loyalty, and there's more to providing than that. So that, and again, then you get into that. Well, I was made to do something. I'm put here for a reason. I mean, I'm here. I got to do something with myself. What am I supposed to be doing? And I felt that compulsion to try to avoid having that regret that I gave my family all the money in the world and I lost them, right? I don't want to lose them. I don't want to have that regret. So if I have to give, and my partner said this to me, he said, I know how much you like, this is funny. I used to take my wife scuba diving somewhere in the world every year, Dominica or, for a week every year. And my partners, when I went to tell him that I was leaving the brokerage firm, he said, look, I know how much you like to travel. You're not going to be able to do that anymore. You're not going to make enough money to. And I said, well, if that's what I have to give up to not have that regret with my kids, then it's worth it. I'll do it. And then the funny thing is now I go to 25 countries a year, but it just worked out that way.
Yeah.
So what do you think explains that a lot of men's like inability to talk to women? I feel like because the first time I had really positive feelings about the United States when I was a kid was when I watched those Hollywood movies. I was like, oh, these people are really good at flirting. They're really good at, make a relationship interesting. That's something I don't see a lot in China,
Really?
Yeah. So, but funny enough, these days I don't see those kind of movies anymore. I feel like people are sort of ability to flirt are sort of going down. I don't know if it's a correct.
I feel like we've
correct
commoditized
observation.
it. I don't know. I mean, I'm not dating, but I feel like it's been
I don't know,
commoditized.
but at least in the movies, I mean, I'm not dating. I've been married for many years, but at least from the movies, I don't see like a lot of like really, I mean, witty romance or things like that. I mean, there are still romance, but it's I don't feel I can. I literally learned a lot of lines from the movies when I was a kid, because in Chinese movies there are no such things like that. I don't know. I'm not sure it has a lot to do with toxic what's
masculinity.
The word? Masculinity. Yeah. I don't know. It's just.
Well, I just think that like being the provider does not necessarily mean you're making $1 million it means that I will do whatever it takes. If I have to work I will spend myself to provide for the people under my care. Being a protector doesn't mean I can whip every guy in town. It means I will be whipped by every guy in town before anybody gets to my family.
Right. And
giving affection is again more about like building that bubble that in here it's safe. In here, there's love, there's harmony. So when I was raising my kids, if something came in that was causing friction in the family, then I felt like it was my job to get rid of that thing. That was why we got rid of the television, because the television was a source of friction, and it was a source of bringing in things that were not conducive to keeping that environment.
Getting rid of television?
Getting rid of television, yeah, we did.
Do they have personal computers?
No,
right?
they didn't. We moved to Panama in 2007, and we didn't take a TV. And I just thought, we can survive for a year without a TV. Right? And it turned out that, man, it was amazing. Like, it got so boring in the house, the kids had to go outside and find something to do. And they got so much more creative, and they started to get along so much better, that when we got back to the United States and we had a TV, we just didn't turn it on anymore. We just sort of quit watching it.
Wow.
Eventually they all got computers and iPads and Game Boys and stuff like that. But for that little window of time, it was actually really nice.
Yeah. I mean, my experience with relationship is kind of different. I don't think I have a clear gender role in mind. I feel like I learned a lot as a straight person. I learned a lot from the LGBT community in a way that, I feel like two people can play the same role. I mean, I'm not sure it applies to every family, but I feel like the dynamic between my wife and my wife and me is that, I feel like she's more of a protector. Yeah, sometimes I have more vulnerable moments, but of course she also has a lot of vulnerable moments. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, but sometimes I panic a little more than she does. Yeah, but
everybody's got to come up with their own sexual politics. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
And without a doubt, where one person is lacking, or where one person doesn't have those three things provided for her.
I think that's what's valuable about understanding traditional gender roles, is that it emerged out of min-maxing people's broad strengths based on our history. But with modern tech and tampons and birth control and stuff, the min-maxing can look really different, right?
Sure.
My husband and I's relationship, most people would think it's an inverted, I'm the money maker going out and doing all the work. He does most of the domestic stuff. But also there's a lot of traditional gender stuff, because he's a lot better at being emotionally just solid and not caring and being super chill, whereas I'm super wound up. But because I'm really wound up, I'm really good at work and making money and stuff like that. And so there's kind of this tension and trade-off where we've kind of been freed up to kind of find the dynamic that works really well. He's a better cook, just genuinely.
Sure.
So he cooks more. I'm way better with animal care and just caring for those things. So I take care of all of the animals. That's my job. I
can do sheetrock like a master. Anything construction related, my wife is way better than I am.
Yeah.
Because awesome. Because she grew up, her dad was he was in construction.
Yeah.
And he was really good at it. But that's the point is more that I think when it comes to dating, finding a mate, I think what's most important is that I believe in something bigger than myself, that I am not the end all and be all of my existence, because a person who is miserable. It makes everybody else miserable, right? It's miserable to be around somebody who they are the end all of their own existence. And so they've got to have something that they're into, something that fires them up, something that they're pursuing, right? Whether that's their job or something else is fine, but people are absolutely tedious if they're the most important thing that they have. And so when it comes to what the military has learned that I think applies to manhood, I just think it comes down to that servanthood relationship, that the guy in charge is actually the servant of the people that he's over. So they don't serve him. It's not this rank has its privileges, it's the other way around. And to the extent that a leader sees himself that way, he will be a better leader.
Okay. Well, I don't want to keep taking up your time because we're pushing 2:37 and you guys definitely need to get out of here to make your flight. I guess we already did your shout out, but let's do it again for this episode just so that it's included in this audio. So Chuck, where can people find you? And then Huey, after Chuck's done, I'd love to hear where we find you as well.
ChuckHolton.com. And my podcast is on The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton on YouTube.
Awesome.
Yeah, for me, I think the best way to find me is on TikTok, Dr. Huey Li, DrHueyli. And if you want to take some personal tutoring lessons, you can go to hueyli.com. Yeah, it's just some mostly
HueyLi.com.
Yeah, it's just a simple page telling people how to contact me for math and some nerd stuff. Yeah, but I think if you want something interesting, I think my TikTok and Twitter have most of it. Right, they're both DrHueyli.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Can I add one more sentence that maybe you can bring it forward to my outro?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll see
or
what
it'll
August
just
can
get
do.
tagged on the end. Yeah. What's up?
Yeah. So I just want to say, on TikTok, I may sound a little bit more elaborate than I do here partly because I have more freedom of editing. Edit out my stuttering and everything, grammar mistakes. But here, it's a long form. So yeah, I just want to, want you guys to take a look. Maybe you can find
next
something.
time we'll do it all in Mandarin.
Yeah.
If you're trying to find a way to get a fair and balanced coverage on the news, you can check out our sponsor, Ground News. They will give you, for every major event going on, a collection of stories from both the left and the right, and it'll rate the respective biases of each publication. And it just gives you a good way to read about a particular thing going on and get the different perspectives in the media about that particular thing. If after you've read the news, you find that you have a 30 to 60 minute gap in your day and you'd like to acquire a new skill, well, good job. We have another sponsor called Skillshare, and Skillshare allows you to go onto their website, watch videos. I think, do you take classes? Can you take watch master classes or whatever? Basically, people demonstrating how to learn a skill. You can check that link below as well. Ground News and Skillshare.
Awesome.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for you two joining us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
It's a real honor to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you guys
so
for
much.
the
Yeah.
first round table.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well done.
The news is divided. Ground News puts it back together with coverage from thousands of outlets around the world in one place. So you can spot sensational reporting, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. Beside every headline, you'll see who owns the source, how reliable it is, and if they have a political bias. Multiple perspectives side by side, giving you a well-rounded view of today's biggest stories. Visit ground.news to learn more.